At this point, we should have a basic understanding of what it means to design a molded part or a drafted part. So we're going to take a look at creating our own part with the design intent to create something that has the applicable draft on the outside of it so that we can make a two-piece mold and have it removed from the mold easily. So let's get started by creating a new file. We'll simply say new, we'll select our drafted template that we created, and say OK. Now before I get started creating any geometry, the first thing I want to do is right-click on my equations folder, manage equations, and modify some of these parameters. I'm going to reduce the wall thickness value to be 0.03. We're going to be making a pretty small part, and that should be a reasonable wall thickness for us. And we're going to leave draft at 3, and we're not going to worry about ribs since we're not going to be adding any just yet, but we might have to reevaluate that number in a later video. Alright, now we can get started creating some geometry. We're going to follow a basic process to create this part, but I want to note before we get started that there's not a single way to do this part. We're going to create several different extrudes to create the geometry we need, then add a few fillets and things like that. But you could also create all of the geometry with a single revolve sketch. Because the revolve sketch is a little bit more advanced, takes a little bit more time, we're going to start by building upon it with individual features so that way you get comfortable with creating these features and applying draft and linking them to our global variables. So the first thing we're going to do is start a sketch on our front plane and start by adding a center point circle. We're going to make this a 1-inch diameter and exit the sketch. Then we can start by extruding this out a distance of 1/2 inch. We're going to use our draft option. We're going to select equal on the keyboard and link it to our global variable draft. Make sure you select the green check mark to make sure that it is linked to our global variable and say OK. Now we can use F on the keyboard to fit this to our screen. What we're going to be creating is a wheel. This is essentially a child's toy wheel. So it's going to be drafted to be pulled from a single mold, so top and bottom mold, but we need to add a few more features first. We're going to select the outside face and create a new sketch. Again, we're going to use the center point circle, but I'm going to use the quick key on my keyboard. We'll start at the origin, and we're going to go out 1/2 inch. We can then exit the sketch, but before we do, I want to show you another way that you can handle this. Instead of exiting the sketch, we can go directly to our feature tab and select Extrude Cut. It'll automatically jump into the new feature with the sketch pre-selected. We're going to extrude cut a distance of 1/4 inch and make sure you also apply draft. Again, hit the equal key to link it to draft and say OK. So now we've started by creating the outside shell of the wheel. We have the inside cutback. We're going to add one more feature. We're going to start a new sketch, again drawing a center point circle, and this time we're going to make it a bit smaller. We're going to say 0.1875, and this time we're going to do a positive extrude, and it's going to come out a distance of 0.05. Again, we need to have draft, so make sure we hit equal, link it to our draft global variable, and say OK. So now what we've done is we've created the basic shape for the wheel, but obviously this is not a consistent thin-walled part. We want to add a few more features to it. Let's add a fillet on the outside edge here, this edge here, and the inside edge as well. Now by default, it's going to come up as 0.1, but we're going to make it a little bit smaller. I'm going to say 0.08. Now we can say OK and take a look at the part. The last thing we want to do to this part is create a shell. So let's go ahead and select shell. We're going to select the outside face of the small boss, rotate the part around, and select the inside face. Now the wall thickness here, we're going to hit equals and link it to our global variable wall thickness. We can show a preview if we wish. Now we say OK. And what we've done is we've created a thin wall version of our part, simply by starting and creating a solid body with the outside shape that we wanted. Let's go ahead and look at a section view. In this case, we can select either the top or the right plane to get a good idea of our section view. We say OK, and we can take a look that we have a nice consistent wall thickness all the way around the part. And the areas where we didn't apply a fillet are nice and square. Now we might want to go back and apply a small fillet to this, so we can simply go back by rolling the tree up, or we can apply the fillet to this edge, and we can make it a smaller radius, let's say 0.04, say OK, and then we can drag this feature above shell, and notice that it updates the shell feature so we have that nice rounded edge on the inside. Now, because this feature actually is going to require pressing a small shaft into it, I'm going to select feature 2 and I'm going to delete it. And I'm also going to say, yes, I want to delete that feature. So now we have more of a straight shaft, an area that we can put an axle through this where it will actually ride on a child's toy. Now, this is not the end of the part. We're going to do a few more things in subsequent videos to make this a better part. But this is a nice starting point. So it's a good point to go ahead and save the file. And we're going to go ahead and call this drafted wheel.